And hello there, folks. This is your Uncle Troy with a video log number 38. Actually, it's an audio log. And today we're talking about the Mandela Effect again. A few weeks back, I posted a video about the Mandela Effect GIF or Jiffy. And actually, it was footage from a game show from 2012 called The Pyramid. In this game show, you have to make your opponent say certain words. You try to describe what you want them to say and get them to say it. And they were going for units of time. So to get him to say decade, you would say things like 10 years. 10 years, what's 10 years? Or, a millennium. If you wanted to say millennium, you'd say 1,000 years. Actually, the guy messed up and said 100 years at first, so the guy was stuck on century for a few seconds. So the last one of the round was Jiffy, which is a very small unit of time. I was raised that Jiffy was 1/60th of a second. An hour is 60 minutes, a minute is 60 seconds, a second is 60 Jiffies. I think that comes from the old Atari 8-bit computers, the Atari 800 computer, I think. Some documentation on that is where I learned about the Jiffy. Anywho, so this guy was trying to get him to guess Jiffy as a unit of time, and he said quickly, short period of time, something like that. The guy was drawing a blank, so he switched tracks and he said peanut butter, not Skippy, peanut butter, trying to get the guy to say Jiffy as in Jiffy peanut butter. And the guy couldn't get it. Time ran out. He said, "Oh, what was it?" And he says, "Oh, Jiffy." And he says, "Oh, Jiffy." And he acts like that was his fault for not getting it. He certainly didn't say, "Then why do you say peanut butter? The peanut butter is named Jif, not Jiffy." Which brings us to this Mandela Effect that I'm going to talk about, mainly because I'm afraid, and I didn't put this in a video containing, the actual video that I got off the Game Show Network, because I don't know if the Game Show Network really cares if I post videos, and if they do some kind of copyright claim or something, I might have to take the video down. So I kept this separate because YouTube has no idea what fair use is. So the point is, back in, say, the 1970s, when I was a kid, I would come home from school. Me and my brothers and sometimes a cousin or two would come over, and we'd be hungry because, it'd been 3 hours since we ate, and we were growing kids. And so my mother would whip out the Peter Pan peanut butter, because that was just the type we liked, and she would make us some sandwiches and pour some glasses of milk, and we'd sit down at the kitchen table and we'd wolf down our sandwiches, gulp down our glasses of milk, because we weren't allowed to eat in the living room where the TV was. And then we'd run into the TV, run into the living room, turn on the TV, and watch cartoons until Dad got home and we had supper. So while we were watching the cartoons, sometimes a commercial would come on for Jiffy peanut butter, and I remember it was Jiffy because they had this really clever advertising slogan, something like, "Don't have time for a meal? Make a nutritious snack in a jiffy with using the great taste of Jiffy," or something like that. But the thing is, the commercial would have kids coming home from school telling the mom they were hungry, dinner wasn't ready, so the mother would make them peanut butter sandwiches, pour them glasses of milk, they'd sit at the kitchen table and wolf them down. And that was just what we had done, so it stuck with me that was a really clever advertising campaign, because that was exactly what we as real kids had just done. So I remember it as Jiffy. And like I said, that was back in, I think, the 70s, early 80s maybe, when I was about 10 years old. And then later in the 80s, I think I remember it being Jif, as in something about kids can be choosy, but choosy mothers choose Jif, because kids don't always choose what's good for them or something, and Jif was supposedly good for you. Anyway, it was choosy mothers choose Jif, and the label on the peanut butter there in the commercial, said Jif instead of the old one that said Jiffy. Fine, dandy. And then later in I think the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, they changed it to choosy moms choose Jif. So it was, make a quick snack in a Jiffy with the great taste of Jiffy, to choosy mothers choose Jif, to choosy moms choose Jif. It changed over the years. The problem is, if you go back in time, Internet Wayback Machine, YouTube videos of old commercials, old pictures of old magazine ads, you don't see Jiffy peanut butter. You only see Jif. And that irritates the heck out of me, because I very clearly remember Jif. I remember it being Jiffy and then changing to Jif. But according to all the internet naysayers, I'm crazy. Now, I admit my memory is not what it could be. I am old. I've had 2 years of chemotherapy that can affect your brain. I've had some radiation treatments that can affect your brain. I had a week of high fever from an infection and lots of painkillers. Spent much of that week talking to people who weren't there. So obviously, when I first joined the football league back when I was a kid, they didn't have a helmet for me. So I spent the first day of practice there on the scrimmage line bouncing off people that had helmets. So obviously my brain may not be the best in the world. So I may not remember things right when I remember Jiffy. The problem is that other people who have not had brain damage remember Jiffy peanut butter as well and remember thinking, what's this Jif thing when it came out? So I wanted to talk about that and just mention it in passing in case the other video gets taken down. If you've not seen that video, I'll put a link to it in the description below. So a couple other things about Jiffy. I've did a little research online and found out other people that remember it as Jiffy. And a couple of things. One, apparently in some restaurants there's a thing called a Jiffy burger. That's a hamburger that has peanut butter on it. And yes, I just threw up in my mouth a little right then. I mentioned that to my girlfriend just to watch the face she made when did that, because she has no filter between her brain and her face, and if you tell her something, her reaction is immediately accessible from her face, and it was just a beautiful. I wish I had a picture for you. Anywho, but they put Jiffy peanut butter on their sandwiches, and they call it a Jiffy burger. So a guy, and if I can find the video, I will link to it, but he called around to various restaurants that he found that served Jiffy burgers and asked, what brand peanut butter do you use? And a couple of them said, we use Jiffy. A couple others said, we use a different type now, but we started using Jiffy, but we quit because our customers preferred Peter Pan or Skippy or some other brand, or we just go with whatever brand our supplier brings us. But it started out Jiffy, that's why we call it a Jiffy burger. And none of them said, we use Jif. None of them said, we used to call it, we use Jif now, we used to use Jiffy, and then they changed it. Nobody says that. Also, the guy who invented Jiffy peanut butter, or at least ran the company that used to make Jif peanut butter, he bought a racehorse, and he called the racehorse Jiffy. Now, that may mean that he, named it after the peanut butter, and then the peanut butter name changed later. Or it could just mean that he meant the horse was fast and would get around the track in a jiffy. Another thing is one of the creators of the CompuServe GIF format prefers that we call it GIF instead of GIF. And one of the articles about him said something along the lines of he liked Jiffy peanut butter, and that's why he pronounced GIF as GIF. But it mentioned Jiffy peanut butter, not Jif peanut butter. So there's that. The other thing is I was on CompuServe back in the late 80s, back when it was a dial-up service. You had to pay like $20 a month to get like 20 hours online, and then you still had to pay long distance charges to call up if you weren't in a major city, you had to call a long distance on your modem to connect, and so that cost you $1 a minute. And then you had to pay CompuServe $1 a minute for the process. But anyway, they had a thing called Special Interest Groups, SIGs, and I was there for about a year, and it would just happen to be the year that the GIF 87A format came out. And the way I remember it is that if people on the technical, the image, computer, GIF, whatever, special interest group, whatever it was called back then, would ask, how do we pronounce GIF? Somebody, and it was usually one of like 2 or 3 different people, would come forward and say, hey, I'm so-and-so. I was on the team that developed the format. There's probably not an official pronunciation, but internally we always called it GIF, hard G, as in goat. And I remember that because I thought using goat as an example of how to pronounce a word was funny, because I just thought goats were funny. So that's how I remember GIF being that. And the other explanation was it's like gift without the T. Is how you pronounce it, GIF. So, like I said, that's how I remember the people that created the format telling me how it was supposed to be pronounced. And then years later, I hear the GIF 89A format has come out, and one of the example GIFs that was going around that showed off some of the new features. One of the new features was the ability to embed text in the file that the viewer could display in a separate window or across the top of the image or wherever it wanted to display. And one of the sample GIFs in the new 89A format said something like, incidentally, it's pronounced GIF. And that sample picture was a picture of Steve Wilhite, who was one of the engineers on the project, and apparently he prefers GIF pronunciation. But like I said, as I remember from previously, other people involved in the project preferred GIF, and so I still call it GIF. And just because one of the people says, it's always pronounced GIF, well, I remember a couple other people that say otherwise. So to me, it's always GIF. But anywho, so the way I remember, there used to be an image that was going around back in the early days that was a picture of Jiffy peanut butter, and it was Giffy instead of Jiffy, and that was to remind people that it wasn't pronounced GIF, it was pronounced GIF, because if it was pronounced GIF, it would be spelled like Jiffy peanut butter. But apparently now time is altered, and the images of the Giffy are now just say GIF, and apparently they were created by Steve Wilhite to remind people it's pronounced GIF like the peanut butter. So like I said, things have changed, and the fact that I remember it wrong, no big surprise. I've got brain damage, but the fact that other people remember it wrong the exact same way I do. They remember Jiffy peanut butter. They remember looking at the label, seeing Jiffy. They remember a time in their lives when they went to the store to buy Jiffy and found Jif instead. And the fact that other people remember it means that it's not just me. It's not just one person with bad memories. It's not just one person with a misconception. It's a, quote, common misconception. And so people just slap the label common misconception on it and say, well, that solves it. It's a common misconception. No, you have to just explain why it's a common misconception. Why do people misremember it? I don't accept the fact that there was another competing peanut butter brand called Skippy. It had an I sound and it ended in Y. So people saying Jif with an I sound in it would add a Y. So Jiffy. Because they're used to saying Skippy, so they turn around and say Jiffy. I don't accept that, because Chevy makes cars, but Ford makes cars and Dodge makes cars, but you don't hear people saying Fordy cars or Dodgy cars, although I have called some Dodge cars Dodgy, but that's not because it was Chevy, it's because they wouldn't run right. Generally, both Ford, Dodge, and Chevy all make good cars. It's just a matter of personal preference. So no holy wars about which car is better. But the point being that just because there's a competing product with a similar name, that doesn't mean people automatically misremember it. I'm certainly not confusing it with Jiffy Pop. I remember Jiffy Pop. We bought some Jiffy Pop once. My father tried to cook it. He burned it, filled the house full of smoke. We weren't allowed to buy Jiffy Pop ever again. I remember Jiffy Lube, the oil change place. Not going to confuse that with peanut butter. I remember Skippy peanut butter. I remember seeing the commercials. I remember once in a great while my mother would buy it instead of the Peter Pan. We'd make fun of her. Shouldn't have done that. But she probably bought it because it was on sale, or she had a coupon, or it was on the end of the aisle in one of them nice little displays, and it was easier just to pick up a thing of a Jiffy or Skippy or generic rather than go down the aisle. And by generic, I don't mean store brand. I mean literal plain glass jar, white label, black letters that say peanut butter and a little nutritional information, and that's it. There was actually a generic movement there for a while in the United States. Look it up. Okay, but anyway, the point being that I decided to throw together this quick audio log actually, about Jiffy peanut butter in case I have to take down the game show video where the guy's talking about Jiffy peanut butter, just in case there's any copyright problems. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it. If you have your own Mandela memories of Jif or Jif peanut butter or Jiffy peanut butter, please put them in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Love you always. Have a good night.